Good morning. I say good morning because it is morning in Sacramento where I am, but I know that people are attending this from all over the world. So it could be any time of day where you are. And I know some of you are watching it after the fact because you couldn't be here at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. So whatever time of day it is where you are, I hope it's good. And I'd like to welcome you to the first in the Healing Journeys speaker series, Zoom speaker series. My name is Jan Adrian, and I'm the founder and director of Healing Journeys. And Healing Journeys has been offering for 25 years the Cancer as a Turning Point from Surviving to Thriving conference around the country. And I know many of you have attended that conference. And I also know that many of you are new to Healing Journeys. So welcome. So after several years of not doing any live events, we decided to try a virtual event. So this is our first one. And I ask you to bear with us because it's our first one. There's been a huge learning curve in doing this. And we may not do it perfectly, but we are doing our best. And I'm so grateful that you're here to experience this first one with us. I'm pleased that our first speaker today will be Sandra Marinella. Sandra is the author of The Story You Need to Tell, Writing to Heal from Trauma, Illness, or Loss. I will introduce Sandra in a minute, but first I want to go over just a few logistics for today's event. Sandra will be giving about a 45-minute presentation that will include two wonderful speakers and readers, both former cancer patients who have worked with her during our book club and her writing workshops. They are Jen Campesano and Susan Lugo, and I'd like to welcome both of them. After Sandra's presentation, we will have time for Q&A, questions and answers. And you can type in your questions anytime during her presentation at the bottom of your, well, at least it's at the bottom of my screen. I don't know what kind of device you're using, but at the bottom of my screen, it says Q&A. And if I click on that, I can type in a question. And at the end of Sandra's presentation, I will read the questions to her and hopefully she will answer them. And I also want to say one of our readers today is Jen Campesano, and she is someone that Sandra will be, whose story Sandra will be telling as part of her presentation. So just to let you know that you can also ask questions of Jen if you want to, because she will be here. We will record this presentation and we will send the recording out in about 5 days to everyone who has registered for this webinar. And we ask that you will either download or watch the recording in a week because it will only be available for 1 week and then it will disappear. So Sandra Marinella is a very special person. Sandra has been a writing teacher for 30 years. Her own cancer diagnosis led her to explore how personal writing and positive psychology could transform her own life. This search led to her pioneering work with thousands of students, writers, and cancer patients whose inspiring stories demonstrate how storytelling and personal writing can help us move past physical or emotional hardships and towards resilience and renewal. Sandra's book, The Story You Need to Tell, Writing to Heal from Trauma, Illness, or Loss, is a critically acclaimed guide to transformational story exploration. Sandra, I'm about to turn it over to you, and I want to let all of you know I've been doing a book group with Sandra. Many of you on this call have been in that book group. We've been doing this for 1.5 years, and I'm sure that you will enjoy Sandra as much as I have. Sandra, I'm turning it over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Jan, for that wonderful introduction. I truly appreciate it. And I have to tell you, I'm excited to be here. We had several hundred people sign up, so this is a new experience for all of us. And I'm a little bit concerned because for the first time in my life, I'm speaking to a lot of people and I can't see the eyes of the people that I'm speaking to. So I truly ask that you help me, that you send your good juju and your positive wishes my way as we undertake this together. And I'm going to jump right now to my screen and share with you some profound things that I hope will matter in our lives. I want us to start this morning with just a moment of gratitude. I want you to think of 3 things that you're thankful for. And as we begin this journey together today, I'm going to be talking with you about surviving to thriving, how our stories can heal and transform us. For I fully believe that they can. I've had a lot of experience with stories through the years. And as I come to you, I want to talk about the power of our words and how important they are in our lives. I know it's hard to ignore that today is 9/11, the 20th anniversary. And I just want to address that right up front. I want to say to you that I know that it's a hard memory. I know there were many difficult losses, and I'm sharing my spirit of love with those of you that are still caught in the quandary of dealing with 9/11. And I think all of us to some degree always will be. There was a lot of pain caused by 9/11. There's also been a lot of pain caused by the pandemic. And many of us have had losses, equal losses, greater losses perhaps, from relatives and friends who have suffered or died in this pandemic. So I love to turn to my words, and I'd like to turn to these words by Nelson Mandela to kind of lift us up today and help us go where we need to go. The greatest glory in living lies not in failing, but rising every time that we fall. We all realize as we're going through the pandemic that we have to do self-care, that we have to find things that help us out and make us feel better. And most of us in the teaching profession or in the therapy profession or in any helping profession, well, all of us, I think we're all in the helping profession of caring for family members. We all know that we need to eat right, we need to exercise, we need to not watch too much news. We've heard these things over and over again, and I think it's wonderful to be reminded of them, but I'm not going to read the list to you because I think you know them. So instead, I'm going to jump to the focus that I have for you today. I think something that's really often forgotten is that it's critical for us to share our stories, that it's really important for us to know, understand, and learn from our stories, our personal stories. And often we can do that through journaling or personal writing. So that's really where my focus is going to be today. I think these 2 things, as much as the other things on that list, have helped me learn to thrive when I'm having a rough time. So how many of you, let me turn to you and ask you this, how many of you have a story? You know, there's some research that came from the New York Times a few years ago that said 81% of us fully believe we have a story inside, a powerful story that could actually be a book. Well, I'm quite sure that's true. I actually think it may be all of us. After 30 years of teaching writers and readers in high school, in college, and now in community groups and hospitals, I'd have to say that I don't think I've ever met a writer that didn't have a story that they valued, that they needed to share, that they needed to understand better. So think about it. We get up in the morning and we're thinking in story. You thought about maybe 9/11 first thing this morning. Maybe you thought about the webinar. And after the webinar, you may go onto Facebook or Instagram and tweak your personal story there. Or possibly you'll have lunch with a friend or family member and you'll tell that person about the tricks you're teaching your dog. So there's always story in our lives. Maybe later this evening, you'll watch a movie or read from a book. And how do we dream? We dream in story. We are, according to my research, we really are storytelling animals. And I learned this more powerfully in my classroom than anywhere else in the world. I truly learned this in room 221. And the photo that I have on the screen now is one of the last photos I took of room 221, because in that classroom was Ben. And I think there's no better way to teach us the power of story than to start with story. And Ben is just a wonderful example, I think, of how this works. And actually, he's a metaphor for how story worked all through my career. And I know I'm talking to a lot of my friends who are teachers out there, and I know they know this as well. We are so guided by these pivotal moments in our classroom. So this is one of them for me. Ben's story. He sat in the back of that classroom. I made sure I filtered out his picture in this actual class, but he sat in the back of the classroom his senior year, and often he would just slouch back against the wall, and he wouldn't talk much, and he wouldn't have much to do with us. And I thought, something is going on. Something is troubling this young man. And sure enough, and most English teachers have this trick called the journal. And I started every class, and I think it was one of the best things I ever did. Just about every class, the first 5 or 10 minutes, we were writing in our journal. And students would write about a book we were reading, or write about a prompt I would give them, something we were thinking about in class, or an essay we were preparing for. But often I just let them write about what was going on in their life. And I began to understand Ben had a struggle going on. There was a death in his family, and it was hard for him. So when we started writing narratives mid-September that year, he came to me. He knew I knew by now, and we talked about it briefly, about this death in his family. And he said, do you think it's okay if I write for my narrative about my uncle's death? And I said, absolutely. If you think you're ready to write about it, please write about it. And so he did. And one day at the end of class, at the end of editing groups, there were just a couple minutes left. And I said, hey, does anybody have a story that they would like to read, that they're ready to make public? And so without thinking, I think Ben just shot his hand up in the air and was good to go until we all looked at him, and then he froze. And now I want to read to you just one paragraph from my book on that story, because I will never forget that moment when Ben froze. Here's how it went. For a few seconds, Ben sat staring at his essay, stunned that he had volunteered. As I prepared to intervene, Ben miraculously found his voice. He read haltingly at first about his lost friend, and then he found his rhythm and read about the good times with his uncle, reading Rolling Stone, riding bikes, listening to U2, especially Beautiful Day. Then he read about a visit to a memorial in Washington, D.C., where he watched his uncle cry for the one and only time ever as he rubbed his fingers across a name. And he noted Uncle Mark could neither forget this war, the Vietnam War, nor could he talk about it. Then his voice softened, and Ben ended by describing a not so beautiful day when he opened the garage door to find his uncle shot to death. Self-inflicted wound, he read, suicide. There was silence. And I will never, ever forget that moment, because it took me time to catch my breath with the power of his story. And I said to Ben, thank you for sharing that. And about the time I finished, the bell rang and the students slowly rose. And then something amazing happened. They all went over to Ben, and one by one, they either hugged him or thanked him for that story. Things changed that day. Life changed for Ben in that classroom, and probably changed a great deal outside that classroom. Those kids embraced him. They understood who he was. They had come to know a new level of Ben, a story that needed to be told. Well, I saw this, as I said before, and I think all of you who work with students know that these miracles kind of happen. And so I saw this over and over. And this made me really, really interested in the power of story. So in graduate school, I continued my studies and I studied narrative therapy. I studied bibliotherapy, and I became extremely interested in how story works in our brains, in the neuroscience of story. And I started using that with the prompts that I was giving my students and helping them understand not just writing, but helping them understand themselves. So I'll just share just a touch of what I've learned. And it gets so reinforced in the work I do in the hospitals now and in the community and in the speaking that I'm able to do. So this is just a little touch of research about the power of story. So our brains have billions of bits of information coming at them all the time. And actually, you can only capture just a little bit of that. You can only capture about 2,000 pieces of information. And those pieces of information help your emotional centers of your brain begin to cobble together story, things you want to remember. And we are wired with stories. We are even defined by the stories we choose. If you're caught up in planning for a wedding, that story is really lifting you up. If you're struggling with an illness, that story is difficult for you. You're having to learn to manage it. So we are defined by those stories that we choose. And they usually dance, our stories usually, I like to say, dance around in the emotional centers of our brain until we understand what to do with them. And one of the most important things we've learned from neuroscience is that when you move story over into the left brain, in the left brain, we have an interpreter. We can learn to understand our story, to put some meaning on it. And as we do that, we can manage it better. We can live with it better. We have a fuller, completer story. And a couple ways that are really, really important to do that is to work to reframe it so you can manage an interpretation that you can live with, that you could be happy with. Because truly, personal writing is one of the ways to do that, because it's using both your emotional centers of your brain and then your left brain to help make some logical sense of that story so that we can create a story. We can begin to interpret it in better ways. We can find the positive in it. We can find the resilience in it. We can even find a courageous understanding or a heroic understanding of ourselves. So if this is all true, it probably became far more true for me in 2012 when I learned I had breast cancer. That was a shock. I went home from my diagnosis and I just simply lied down on the floor of my kitchen and rocked back and forth and thought about, what am I going to do? This is not how I plan my life. I had breast cancer. And so I decided I'm going to get up tomorrow morning and I'm going to go to my favorite bookstore, Changing Hands, and I'm going to get a new journal and I'm going to figure out my way through this. And I want to say that here it is. From Changing Hands, the next morning, I bought this bright red I Have Cancer journal. And this is where you see it there in the photo. This is where I began to record my struggle, where I screamed, where I yelled, where I then made sense of what was happening to me and all the wonderful things my friends were doing for me. And my doctors, my surgeon, Dr. Lou, was just so helpful and embraced everything I was going through. So I wrote this down, and as I was doing this and going through, I call 2012 the year of my cancer. About 3/4 of the way through, I had, I think, my third or fourth surgery. And I told Dr. Lou, oh my gosh, I think my writing is transforming this experience for me. And I'm thinking maybe I need to share this with cancer patients. And she was so supportive. And so I did exactly that. I began to research and study to make sure that this was really going to matter to other people, not just me. You know, am I the only freak that writes and feels like it matters? I discovered that that was not at all the case. I discovered in reading that Dr. James Pennebaker had started when I was teaching journal writing. He was out there researching the power of it. He was out there checking and showing that people, by sharing story, by talking to a counselor, a friend, a good therapist, a spiritual advisor, by releasing story, it did help. But his surprising findings were not only did the talking help, the writing was profound. And so the studies show, just very quickly, I was starting to write a book at this point. I began to look at over 200 studies, which now I can confirm have stretched to over 1,000 studies that show writing helps improve our health and our well-being. And these are just a few of the ways. It lowers stress, reduces pain, improves our moods, reduces symptoms of depression, reduces visits to the doctor. And most important, this one I love the most, increases psychological well-being. So, I mean, I don't just want to survive, I want to thrive. So this data really excites me. I went out into the community as a result of this. And Rainer Maria Rilke always said, one of my favorite poets, there's nothing so wise as a circle. And I knew that from teaching. I mean, I knew from being in writing groups and in story groups, in high schools and in college, and now in the community. This is one of my community writing groups. I knew that in going out and sharing this work, sharing wisdom, sharing poems, sharing reading, sharing writing, that it would change us. It could change people. And so I did. I began with the help of my doctors. I began at Piper Cancer Center, and I began to work with patients there, cancer patients. And then because my husband is a disabled veteran, I decided to volunteer down at the hospital, the VA hospital, and work with a group of PTSD veterans and help them with their stories. And so I did that for 3 years. And then finally, as I was finished, there were so many exciting things that were coming out of it. I just started writing this book, The Story You Need to Tell, furiously. I started writing it, and I wanted to carry the work forward in a way that would best help promote it in our institutions, particularly schools and hospitals. And I was approached by Mayo Clinic and asked if I wanted to volunteer there and teach this. And so I took my book, and that's where I went. I went to Mayo Clinic, where the amazing Dr. Denise Milstein and the operations manager, Barbara Tomley, collected data on the work I was doing and the workshops I was doing with their patients. For 2 years, they collected this data. And over a 2-year period, we had 199 participants, and they attended 23 workshops, and the results were exciting. We found that 99% of the folks in the program had high satisfaction. 93% thought it was beneficial for their stress. And the surprising thing for me, 68.7% thought it helped with pain management, and improvement of mood, 95%. And my favorite statistic again, I want us to thrive, not simply survive. There were a lot of increased feelings of well-being in the folks who worked with us. So what do we do if this is the case? If writing or sharing our story can help us heal, can help us grow, and can even help us transform, how do we begin? Well, that was the question that has driven me for the last 5 years, to be honest. How can we package this and share it with people in a way that will make their lives better? So this is really what I found out. I found out to survive and thrive, to allow your story to heal and transform you, there were definitely ways to do it. And I want to gift you, I want to give those to you today. First of all, just sharing our stories. Sitting around, as I did last week after swimming with a couple of my grandkids, we sat around and told stories about our past. So I was back in my classroom again, but now with my grandkids, we can do this in our lives, just share our stories as Ben did. That's the overarching thing. this power of our sharing of story. And here are 5 ways that I learned from my writing groups and my book clubs where people do not have to write. These are the ways that I've learned that will help us manage our stories and make them better, help us live with better stories, I should say. So let's take a look at those. There's free writing or journaling, challenge writing, reframing your story, positive writing, and gratitude writing. And I'm going to go quickly through each one of those so you have an introduction to each one. And I'm going to begin with a story that I think should absolutely start today on 9/11, because this story begins with 9/11. You can see the picture of Goldie. Matthew Goldie Goldston is in the back of this group. There's a little red arrow going to his head. And when I started working at the VA hospital in downtown Phoenix, Goldie was one of the first ones who answered my email that said, hey, have any of you gone into war and taken a journal with you? And Goldie said, oh yes, he wrote me back. I have a little green journal and I took it into war with me and I knew it was going to be important, and it was. And so I began interviewing Goldie. We began meeting up by Luke Air Force Base where he was being treated for PTSD. And we began talking about his writing and what happened in Afghanistan. And he really wanted me to tell you his story, and I'm honored to do so. Because Goldie was in high school. He was a senior when 9/11 happened. And immediately he said, when 9/11 happened, I knew that was it. I was going to be a Marine. I was going to sign up for the service. I was going to help my country. I was proud of my country. And this is his squad. He went to be trained for the Marines, and this was his squad. And they ended up in Afghanistan in 2008 through 2010. And here you have them. And he said to me, Goldie said, you know, most of these guys went in because of 9/11. We believe in this country and we wanted to do something to help. So here he is with these people, and he made it clear to me, these guys became my brothers. But he said, when we actually got to Afghanistan, it was not the pretty picture you would want it to be. He said it was pretty awful. Many of us were shooting guns for the first time. We were firing at the Taliban and Al Qaeda in firefights. And he said it was really discombobulating. We just, no matter how you train, it's one thing to train for war, it's another to be at war, where people are killing you and you're killing them. So Goldie told me, without a doubt, I used this little journal. And when our interview stopped after 6 months, and I was disappointed, but he was moving to Missouri, he gave me his journal. And this is truly one of the best gifts I've ever had. You can see in it a love letter. You can see in it pages are ripped out. And there's all kinds of, I don't know, there's scribbling and there's all kinds of mishmash and doodles and drawings. And it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And I'm gonna ask my friend Jen Camposano to read one page from that journal for us.
This place is going to be rough. Few contacts. It is the first week and we are on patrol and an IED goes off, followed by PRK machine gun fire. The number of Taliban is unknown. They are in a tree line on the other side of the canal. Gunfire is being exchanged here and sounds like people getting change from a cash register. At least no one was hurt today. More gunfire. We have a patrol to Haredi Wall. Most firefights happen at the wall. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. What will happen? Afghanistan, November 22nd, 2009.
Thank you, Jen. That, of course, was a day that Goldie would never forget, because he told me what happened at the Haredi Wall. They went there, they were stuck in a firefight, he said, for somewhere between 7 or 8 hours. And at the end of that day, his best buddy, Nick Hand, who is not in this photo, was shot in the head. So Goldie said, how do you deal with something like that? I mean, we were told as Marines, we had to buck up, we had to be strong. And here I have just watched my best friend be killed. So they went back to the field after this firefight, and Goldie said that was the worst day of my life. He said, what we did, he said, many of us got down and prayed. We turned to, prayer to help us. And he said, but many of the guys after that just put on their headphones and blasted their brains out with music. And he said, I'm sure that helped them. But he said, I got out this and I screamed and I yelled and I wrote about what had happened and how am I going to deal with this? And he said, it's really important to me when you talk to people. And he said, and I know you will, I want you to tell people that in the middle of a war, understanding the power of a journal, free writing, my story helped take the unseen monkey off my back. This writing, he said, really saved me. And here's a picture of Goldie in November each year. It was November 22nd, 2009, the day he lost Nick. He goes back to Nick's home in Kansas, and with Nick's family and many of the squad members, many of his Marine brothers, they go back together. And he said, I don't write in my journal except when I'm struggling. He said, but I want you to know I've really learned the power of story. We share story together. We celebrate Nick's life together and honor it. So from Goldie, free writing is writing your way. He told me a high school teacher taught him the value of taking a journal when you were struggling and just writing out whatever you needed to. And a lot of the data tells us this is a positive thing to do. It helps you release your stress, your pain, and it helps you find catharsis. It may be painful at first, but eventually you'll find you can reach a peace with what's going on. So it's important to remember, because a lot of us had English teachers that marked up our paper with red marks and made us struggle with the grammar. And that is important and it has its place, but it does not have its place with personal writing. Personal writing should be you having the freedom to say what you need to say, finding a comfortable way to say it, whether it's doodles or drawing. For a long time, my husband said, oh, I don't journal. But you know what? He's always had a journal. And one day, several years ago, we had a discussion. We looked at it and we realized he's got drawings, notes, and lists all through it. So he's come to understand in his own way, he keeps a journal. So find a comfortable place, just let the writing flow. And if you can, release the inner critic, because in the writers I work with and the storytellers I work with, it's the inner critic that stops us more than anything else. All right, now I want to jump from free writing to a very important kind of writing called challenge writing. And this is Barbara's story, Barbara Lee. I so love this woman. But to be honest with you, when I first met Barbara Lee, she intimidated me. I was volunteering down at the Veterans Hospital, and she was in my PTSD group. And there were, probably 6 to 10 of us each time meeting in this little circle box, in this little box of a room. And we would read our stories. I would give them prompts. They would share their writing. And it was often a struggle because these people had many hard stories to share. And we did our best to let them release those stories, to put those out there. And Barbara Lee did exactly that. She was, when I met her, kind of an enraged woman who would come into the group and boom, she would slam her books down on the table and grab her poems. And she didn't like journals. She said, I only write poems. She said, I only write poems. But immediately I began to realize her poems were lyrical and powerful and beautiful, and they were indeed releasing her story. And here's one of them. And I'm going to ask my good friend, Susan Lugo, to read this poem to us.
Wasted potential. Withered, dark, misshaped fruit litters the landscape. Sun-ripened, unfit for human consumption. Yellow-green flesh threaded with black. Decayed, succulent meat lying in waste. Shrunken, grainy skin smothers the seed within. blackened in death's hollow pursuit, returning to Mother Nature's womb. Remembered only by the unwilling sexton, unfulfilled potential, buried beneath the avocado tree.
Thank you, Susan. That was beautiful. This poem was the beginning of Barbara Lee releasing a lot of pain. She began to write a series of poems about her abuse, about being overseas with the Air Force, about being raped by her superior, and about being silenced. There was no one to tell. There was no way to release this pain and this story to anyone. She never told anyone for over 20 years. And then she was in this group, and the little bits and pieces began to slowly come out through her poems, her beautiful, beautiful poetry. And after several months of these poems, suddenly there was a huge change in her. And she started coming into groups smiling. And she was just different. That's all I can promise you. And I can show it to you as well here. These are photos of her art that she sent me. And Barbara had begun to paint, which was also a beautiful cathartic release for her. She had begun to practice yoga. She just began to transform herself with her words. And you can see it in the trees that she's painted that are opening up. And you can see it in the self-portrait that is up at the top, a woman with her head thrown back who looks like she has a voice. And she did have a voice. And I want to show you what I now call a transformation poem, because Barbara did indeed, she changed. And this is one of the many poems she wrote that I call transformative, or a transformation poem. Susan, would you please read this?
The measure of a woman. I want to be a tailor, skillfully draping, tucking, and pinning the fabric of my being on the large busted mannequin standing in the corner. Organza, silk, cotton, and wool slip through my fingers, faded by time, darted and pleated, contoured faithfully to the shape of my body. The measure of a woman is not in the curve of a breast or a line of a thing. The true measure of a woman is her ability to take up space in the universe, to stretch and reach for that which allows others to be comfortable in her presence. An abstract construct infuses the mannequin, no longer content to be an it. I emerge from the shadows.
Beautiful. Thank you. What a change we saw in Barbara in our group when she read this poem. And I know if you study narrative therapy or any kind of therapy, this is often called trauma therapy, post-traumatic growth. And indeed, I think we all felt it with Barbara. Eventually, she moved on to another writing group, into studying writing at a college, because she no longer needed our PTSD group. But no longer content to be an it, I emerged from the shadows. Oh, that was powerful change. And I celebrate her. I celebrate the change that she found, and her words I know helped make that change. So challenge writing, it's important to write about the difficulties we have. We have to be safe. We can't do it when we're not ready. Or if you're in a car wreck today, you probably don't want to go out and write about it. Maybe you're ready, but maybe you're not. Maybe you're too traumatized by what has happened. So you have to be careful with where you take your writing. But your story and your writing, challenge writing, can really, really help. It can grow you from the difficult times. It can help you learn to understand and see them in a different way and manage them. And most of this work, challenge writing, is derived from expressive writing. And expressive writing back in the 80s was researched and really, I think, identified or defined by Dr. James Pennebaker, Again, I mentioned him earlier. He's the guru, I think, of expressive writing, and he's been such a great model for thousands of us across the world and for researchers across the world who have taken his work forward. Because he suggested in his own studies that you write about a challenge for 3 or 4 days for 20 minutes, that you share your feelings and thoughts. And usually when I follow his protocol, I work hard to have people each day, if they're writing on the same subject, to look for a different aspect, to look for different perspectives in the story. And eventually I have them come back and reflect on this writing and look at what they learned, because it can be amazing, the growth, the learning, the wisdom that comes out of pain. And this led into the work that largely I've done since I arrived teaching at Mayo Clinic. And I now do a lot of groups with both Healing Journeys and my local independent bookstore, Changing Hands, and at Mayo Clinic. And this story comes from a dear friend of mine who I taught with at a college, a local college, and his name is Chris Schnick. And he was an English teacher. I too was a creative writing teacher and a teacher of teachers. But Chris taught me, and my work with my writers in the community now, I think, really helped me grow this whole idea, is that a story can be reframed, that we can take an impossible, difficult story and we can rewrite. I'll say it in Chris's words. My sister's story was a hard story for me. I learned you can rewrite a story from your past and find a better way to live with it. Let me take you directly into Chris's beautiful story. This is his sister, Jenny. And when they were growing up, they were in a family of 8 siblings in Maryland. They loved to swim, they loved to play. Chris was closest in age to Jenny, and he loved her very much. But as she aged, there was a lot of trouble. And it was a more difficult relationship because Jenny became mentally ill. She suffered from manic depression. She had to be put on medication. And at least once they had her hospitalized. And she absolutely hated control. She wanted to be Jenny. She wanted to be free. And so this was very painful for Chris because there was always the struggle about what is the right thing to do with Jenny. Well, Chris grew up and moved to the Southwest where I live, Phoenix. And Jenny stayed back east, and her family tried to care for her, tried to keep her on medication. And 2 years ago, she decided, I'm done with that. I am finished with that story. So she got off her meds and she told Chris, I'm going to go west. I hope I see you. I want to see you. She got in her car and she started driving west. She called Chris as she was driving through Phoenix, but it was like 1 o'clock in the morning and he was asleep. He tried to talk to her, but he could make very little sense of what she was saying. So it ended up, she got on to California. Her car got impounded. She very quickly became homeless. And a year later, she died on the steps of a church as a homeless woman. And Chris was so distraught and upset by this. He cared so much about his sister. He felt like I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I should have been there for her. So he began to write. He began to write her stories. An English teacher, he knew that's what you do. So he began to write that story. And he began to write about a lot of the painful things, how as a child, when she swam, she wanted to be released from, she wanted to swim the entire Chesapeake Bay. And she was trying to do it for a benefit. And they pulled her out and said, the waters were too choppy, you can't. She always resented that. So that was a story that stood out to Chris. So he wrote that. And he wrote about her pain to be herself and go off her meds and to become in charge of her life. So she drove to California and died homeless. All those memories were painful. But then Chris said, I realized those aren't my only memories. I need to write tributes and gratitudes. I need to do the things that show how much I care about Jenny. So he began to write the stories about swimming with Jenny, the fun they had on the beaches, the shells they collected. And it came out into a beautiful script. And I have to say that, you know, in analyzing what Chris did and what many of my writers have done since, I found that rewriting or reframing your story is incredibly powerful for helping us thrive instead of just survive. He began by writing the story. He shared his experience, as Penny Baker suggests, with both thoughts and feelings. But then he began to come back to it and honor Jenny with the gratitudes, honor Jenny with his positive memories, and reflect and learn from Jenny. And he did reflect and learn from her, to the point where he wrote a script. He wrote a script about his experiences with Jenny. And he not only wrote it, he presented it. He presented it at a stage here in Phoenix called Space 55. And oh my gosh, how powerful was that? When Chris told me about that, he said, having your story witnessed, having shared a story that's painful, and then having, boom, come to the realization that Jenny controlled her life, that she wanted to control her life, and that as painful as it is for me and always will be, she did have some control over her own life. He said, I found I could live with that story, that I wanted to stop her from doing what she did, but it was her story, and I love Jenny. So Chris had that magic moment on stage where I think flow just sort of goes through you and you're able to share the power of story with others. I hate to jump on, I love that story. But actually, the last story is my favorite one. It's my favorite one because it's part of my story. In 2012, when I learned I had cancer and decided to work with cancer patients, my now friend, Dr. Linda Liu, said, hey, I would really like you to write with Jen Camposano. I know you're working on this book. You want to help cancer patients. Jen, last year in 2011, was diagnosed with metastatic stage 4 cancer. It's not looking good. It has spread to her lungs, her spleen. She wants to do, she's positive, she's upbeat, she wants to do everything she can to overcome this. She has a young child. And so I drove to Jen's home and I began to work with her. And wow, I had cancer, but my cancer was a simple journey through surgery after surgery after surgery. Jen's cancer was treatment scan, new treatment scan, chemo, new scans, and more chemo. And this went on for 4 years. And very quickly, Jen asked me if I would be her chemo buddy, if I would attend chemo with her. And we found this just a beautiful way to write together. That's what we did. I wrote my book. Jen wrote a book, as well as she began work on something that was just so her, so wonderful. She began a blog called Booby and the Beast. Great title. And in Booby and the Beast, she was sharing positive stories in her life or the struggles she was having, but how to hold those struggles. And I call them positive struggles because, yeah, she was struggling. Yeah, her life was hard. But yes, she was taking those hardships and she was finding a way to frame them that she could manage them in a positive light. And she did that just year after year. And I so love her blog. Of course, I put it in the book and use it as a model all the time with cancer patients. And I'm going to share just a piece of one of those blogs with you. And my beautiful friend Jen, of course, is with me. So I've asked her to go ahead and read a little bit of her blog to us.
Sandy, thank you so much. I love that picture. It it just takes me back. My boy is 10 now. And he was, just a toddler there. So it's really wild where life can take you. Okay. Before my mastectomy, I had to get an EKG to test my heart to make sure it would be strong enough for surgery. As I waited in the hospital lobby, I flipped through a Good Housekeeping magazine from last summer with Michael J. Fox, who suffers from Parkinson's disease, on the cover. The feature article was about the actor turning 50. In his interview, he said that there's a motto in acting that he applies to his life: don't act the end. In the Good Housekeeping article, Michael J. Fox explained his motto this way: If you know a bus is closing in on you as you stand in the middle of the road, there's still a lot of space to fill between where you are and the moment that bus hits you. In other words, don't act like you've been hit by the bus until it happens. My hair is returning slowly. Life goes on, and yet the axle around which my life spins has been knocked off kilter. I'm trying to find my new center of gravity, and it's a strange, unbalanced space to occupy. I no longer feel like that bus is closing in on me, and although there are no guarantees in this life, between now and when that bus does someday hit, I have a lot of enjoying my days to get to.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jen.
Of course.
Oh, wow. So in 2016, we had good news. And you see Jen on the left there, we're out celebrating. We're having breakfast together because she learned she no longer had scans that were showing any cancer and hadn't for some time. But life still throws us some curveballs, and she has had to cope since that time, since her cancer times, with a new diagnosis of sarcoidosis. So her struggle isn't over, but at least she's walking forward still with her positive attitude, and she's become a patient advocate. So she's doing something very meaningful for other people who are experiencing illnesses and struggles. So it's been an honor to be her friend. My favorite photo, of course, is Jen in 2017 when her daughter was born. I think that kind of shows you her life has gone on. She's living her life. She's living in the moment. She's really making the most of it. That's a kiss for Jen. Okay, positive writing. When I was working with Jen, I began studying positive psychology, Martin Seligman. I mean, it was a big thing, and I couldn't get away from it because I thought, this is helping my writers. This is helping my writers. And Jen seems to me to be the best model of it. I mean, she was on autopilot with positive writing. It centers on the good and meaningful things that happen to us. For example, when you leave today, you might want to ask yourself, what are 3 good things that have happened to me in the last day? So I think if we ask about gratitudes and positives each and every day, we'll find we've increased the serotonin, we've increased the dopamine, we'll have made our brains operate at a higher level. And that's what I want for all of us. So let's go back and just quickly review as I wrap it up here. Critical that we share stories, that we communicate, that we connect with others. Critical that we have a way to release stories when we have to, and free writing and journaling is a really good way. There's a wonderful community out there that I'll quickly mention. Linda Monk has the International Association of Journal Writers. And for people who want to get online every day and do that, it's a beautiful community. So free writing is a beautiful thing. Challenge writing. Thank you, Dr. Pennybaker, for teaching us the importance of putting our difficulties out there and learning from them and growing from them. And I'm so grateful for the work I've been able to do with writers that has helped me learn how to help them reframe their stories, like Chris's stories, with positives, as Jen used, and with gratitudes, as I try to use all of the time. So very quickly, let's go forth here and share story, free write when it helps, challenge write when we need it, reframe our story when we need to get off the ruminations and struggles, and using positive writing and gratitude writing to make that possible. So this is the book that I wrote to make that happen. I'm honored to share it and use it in cancer groups and book club with Healing Journey and Mayo writing groups. It is intended to help you do this work on your own, but we also use it in group often. So I hope that it will help you. The proceeds from the book support cancer research, of course. And then finally, I want to end, this work is so great. I get to do it with Healing Journeys, book club with Healing Journeys, which you're welcome to join in October, and writing group in my community with my Changing Hands bookstore and Mayo. So please come join me. But I just want to say that I try to frame all this work with gratitudes, and that's what I want to end with today. It's what I started with and what I want to end with. I want to say a special thank you to the beautiful Jen Camposano and Susan Lugo, my cancer friends, and to Jan, Adrian, and Georgia Peach from Healing Journeys, who feel this work is important and have tried to help me share it. I honor and appreciate them and the board. And I also want to end by saying my greatest gratitude is to you folks who spent time on a Saturday morning or after 9/11, sometime afterwards, looking at this and trying to learn about the power of our story and what we can do to make our stories help us thrive, not simply survive, because they can. They can. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. My reaction again demonstrates the power of story. Even though I have read your book more than once and I've heard all those stories several times, they still bring tears to my eyes. They still bring up emotion, and story is very powerful. I want to read a comment. Some of the questions have disappeared that were here before, but Carolyn Ann Sprague says, thank you so much. This webinar has been especially helpful to me as I am figuring out how best to share my story to help others. Bless you. And I want to get back to, I'm having trouble reading these. There, 15 people have written in the chat in the last few minutes, and I know that you can all read that. But in the beginning, people were saying hello from Poland, hello from Florida. Somebody just sent you 2 hearts, and I know, Carrie, you wrote a Q&A and I can't get back to it now. But I know that a question we had the other day that I would love for you to deal with again is writing a challenge story, I think, is the hardest. And people have said, even though something may have happened years ago, to write the story brings up the pain all over again. And is it worth it? And how do you deal with that?
I think that's a really important question, and I'm delighted to talk about that because I always think of the story of Elie Wiesel, who said after his tenure in the concentration camps in World War II, he said he could not write about what he experienced for 10 years, and he didn't. And that was probably a very wise thing, because if you are traumatized by an experience, it takes time for your mind to adjust to it and to wrap your head around it, to learn to integrate it into your life. But I have found that most of the writers who come to me are not really still flipped out about their story. They're ready to write about it. And often they'll come and start to write about it and be empowered by it. They're ready to get it out. You can, of course, do other things such as choose to join, like book club. We don't require writing at all. You can join a share club where we just talk about the importance of story and the power of story, and how when you're ready to write about it, you can write about it. So it is important to be careful, but I think you know when you're ready to write. If it's too hard, don't write about it. If it triggers you, don't write about it. Write about something else. Great question.
Thank you. And then from Carrie, I did find this question. She says, thank you for sharing this webinar. Deep material and makes me want to buy a new journal. She wants to know, does Jen still have her blog? Beautiful stories, Sandra. Workshops are for everyone, not just cancer patients. Thank you. So the question is, Jen, do you still have your blog?
I do, and I typed a quick answer to Carrie on there with, I don't know if everyone can see that, but there I put the link to the blog. I did stop writing in it, but it's still up. If you want to go back and look, I figured last month when I hit my 10-year cancerversary was a good stopping point to sort of wrap up that part of my story. And as Sandra mentioned, I did write a book, and I'm putting some finishing touches on that. So I will, my goal is to get that out into the world in the next couple of years once my daughter's not a toddler anymore.
So you've written the book, but it's not published yet.
Correct.
So we get to wait for it.
That's right.
Okay. Sandra, there are 27 comments in the chat. And I think you might want to know that one of them is from John Fox. And I can't find that again, but I'm happy to know that John Fox is here. Do you want to say who John Fox is and just mention his organization? Because it's so valuable for writers.
Yes, and no, you've worked with John. I'd like for you to do that. Go
Okay.
ahead.
John Fox is the head of the Poetry Medicine organization. He has a book called Poetic Medicine. I think that's the title of it. And he really works. I've attended a week workshop with him, and he really does teach the healing power of writing poetry. He sees poetry as medicine. And I want to recommend his work to other people.
Thank you, Jan. I would like to comment on it too. I know that book and love that book and love John's work, and I want to honor it and say that there are many groups that we should honor, and that I'll try to send out a list or make a list available of the International Journal Writing Association, the National Association for Poetry Therapy, and of course, John's wonderful work. There's just so many great groups that are really trying to help us understand story, poem, and the difference it can make in our lives. So, and thank you, John. Thank you so much for being here. Kisses coming your way.
Yeah. There are just so many things in the chat. Nancy, and I'm assuming that's Nancy McKay, says, I see a great similarity between the approach of Lawrence Lashan and positive writing. And Lawrence Lashan is a psychologist who wrote the book Cancer as a Turning Point, and it's really what our conference was based on. So I just want to put in a plug for that book too, because he did find in his work with cancer patients that even though he was working with terminal cancer patients, when they started looking for the positive and what made them excited to get up in the morning and what created their bliss in life, that in his research, 50% of them went into long-term remission when he did that kind of therapy with him. So the positive writing is really an extension of that, and I think is really important. And somebody named Pinkley says, after the tragic death of my mother, April 5th, 2021, I am so thankful for this time. So I'm not going to read all these comments. I think all of you have access to the chat if you want to read them, but there's so many positive comments and people have appreciated this time with you so much. And I want to give my personal thank you to all of you for attending the first in our speaker series. Also, thank you to all of those that made donations to Healing Journeys as part of your registration. Remind you that we have recorded this presentation, and we will send the recording out in about 5 days to everybody who registered for this workshop. And we ask that you please either download it to your system or listen to it within a week, because then it will disappear. And there are 3 upcoming programs, but first, Sandra, I don't think you mentioned your gift. And would you please talk about the gift and how you're going to choose who's going to receive the gift?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sort of as an afterthought, I was telling Jan, I was so grateful that people would spend time with me on a Saturday morning and help us understand and care about this work. And I said, I need to do something. And I said, how about I give out a couple of books and a journal and a gift card, a small gift card to Amazon. So I don't think we really publicized it, But I just wanted a way to make it concrete that I really appreciate you. So I'm going to take the names. George is going to send me the names of the attendees. And I've asked my granddaughter if she will, if I mix them up in a basket, if she will choose a name, 2 names for a book, 1 for a journal and 1 for a small gift card. And I will be emailing you and just trying to spread the joy this way. Thank you, Jan, for remembering. I get so excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. And there are 3 upcoming programs that I want to tell you about too, because some of you will want to have more of Sandra. Sandra is offering another book group, Reading the Story You Need to Tell, and registration for that group will be available on the Healing Journeys website in about a week. And we will send all of you an email letting you know when that's open. That group starts Tuesday, October 12th at 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time and runs for 6 weeks. And then Sandra is also offering a writing class that would be a good follow-up to this presentation. It is called The Story You Need to Tell, Writing and Resilience. That group starts October 14th at 10 a.m. and also runs for 6 weeks. And you can find out more about that at her website, which is storyyouTell.com. That's all one word, storyyouTell.com. Or you can sign up through Sandra's local bookstore, changinghands.com. And then I also want to let you know that the second in the Healing Journeys speaker series will be Saturday, October 9th, and will feature Naisha Winters, who's a naturopathic doctor and author of The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. And she has a new book coming out next month called Mistletoe. I've had the privilege of reading this book, and it's one of the best I have read, clarifying what integrative treatment is and why it matters. So it's about mistletoe, but it's about so much more than that. And again, we'll send you an email letting you know when registration is open for that. So thank you again for being part of the first in our speaker series, and we hope you'll join us again next month. And do any of the rest of you have any parting words? We've actually accomplished our first speaker series.
Yay! Just sincere thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Yes. And thank you to Jen and Susan for being part of this. Your readings were very heartfelt and powerful. And thank you, Sandra, for this wonderful presentation.
Honored to share this with you.
And thank you all for coming. And we'll see you next month. Goodbye.